Hi, I'm Derek Asham. Welcome to the stream. Today, rallying in Russia, a political movement gains steam on social media. Our digital producer, Ahmed Shahabaldin, is here looking out for your live feedback. Joining him on the couch today are two special guests. Anastasia Mirzoyants, she's a research analyst at the Intermedia Survey Institute here in the U.S. And sitting next to her is Jeffrey Mankoff, a visiting fellow at the Washington, D.C.-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's also the author of the book, Russian Foreign Policy, The Return of Great Power Politics. Welcome, both of you, to the stream. Great having you here. We're going to come to you guys in just a minute, but I want to dive right in, and we want our audience to know that we're always looking for the stories that you want us to cover. So if you've got something, tweet it to us using the hashtag AJStream. We're going to get to our discussion on Russia in just a sec, but before that, Ahmed has been looking out for feedback from you.
Thanks, Derek. This story was actually suggested to us by Ayla Bunyak, who posted it on our Facebook page. The security contractor, once known as Blackwater, has now changed its name for the second time in less than 3 years. The company, which first changed its name to Xi Services, will now be called Academy. It's a name inspired by Plato's Academy in ancient Greece. Now, the name change has angered many online, including Mike Gonzalez, who tweeted this. He says, "Dear Blackwater, Z, and Academy, rebranding murder is still murder." Now, the company's name originally was Blackwater, and it became very controversial after a series of high-profile incidents during the Iraq War, including a 2007 shooting in Baghdad where 17 Iraqis were killed and many more were injured. On Monday, President Obama declared that American troops will leave Iraq this month. But on that same day, Academy's new CEO, Ted Wright, told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "I think eventually we are going to get a license. We are going to do business in Iraq." Now, after the announcement, netizens started sharing links to draw attention to Academy's troubled past. U.S. blog site Gawker has published a 4,500-page record of every incident when a Blackwater guard shot at an Iraqi citizen between 2005 and 2007. And investigative journalist Jeremy Scahill, who wrote the book Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, wrote this on Twitter. He said, "In honor of Blackwater changing its name to Academy, I'm changing my name to Jeremiah. Like them, I'll still be the same," he writes. Now remember, if you have stories like this one, or photos or videos that you want to share with us, you could do so using the hashtag AJStream. But for now, let's take a quick look at those of you who are sending us tweets right now.
Will this be Russia's winter of discontent? The nation has experienced a series of protests since its controversial parliamentary election on December 4th. Prime Minister Vladimir Putin's opponents accuse his ruling United Russia Party of rigging the vote. Putin himself blames Western powers for the unrest, and his supporters say the election was by and large free and fair. The nation's biggest protest since the fall of the Soviet Union is now playing out on social media. Let's take a look at this video. Now, this is an example of protests that have been taking place, and opposition protesters have been recording pictures of rallies like this in order to document any alleged abuse by security forces. Most demonstrations have been relatively peaceful thus far. Now, this is not the only footage that we've gotten. This is a particularly intriguing piece because the protests were triggered by viral videos like this one. It shows an elderly woman who seems confused by her paper ballot. Opposition supporters allege that a pro-Putin volunteer took advantage and stamped her vote for United Russia. But election officials say that nothing of that sort has happened. So I want to bring it right here to our panel. First, Jeffrey, let's start with you. Has there been, is there any legitimacy to allegations of election fraud here?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen on some of the social media, not just this video, there have been several examples of what clearly appear to be fraudulent procedures by presumably representatives of the United Russia Party, whether it's stuffing ballot boxes or filling out ballots for people who would have been doing it otherwise. Also, if you look at the results of the election in certain parts of Russia, particularly in the North Caucasus, Chechnya and some of the other republics down there, where United Russia's total is well over 90%. In Chechnya, I think it was something like 99%. I think it's pretty clear that there's some kind of rigging going on.
Got you. And Anastasia, what's your position on this? Or at least can you give us a little bit of the perspective of how some of the Putin supporters might be looking at it? Putin has overseen a great rebound in Russian economy. They've had a relatively stable political and economic order. Isn't there an argument for, a continuation of the same policies?
There is definitely an argument, and I think the problem at this point that while the results of the elections are analyzed and while the accusations are made of falsifications of the elections, we do not look at the larger perspective, at the bigger picture. At this point, Russia has about 93,000 of voting points. And based on the information from the Central Elections Committee, which is the special establishment that is responsible for the elections, they have approximately 1,000 complaints from 1,000 different voting points. So we have 92,000 that did not send any complaints, that might not have any complaints, or just didn't send. There is no exact information of what happened.
And when we were talking about where the complaints are coming from, is there any pattern there? Are they from urban areas, from certain parts of the country?
There is a certain pattern. Most of the complaints are coming from the large cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, Irkutsk. However, if we look, for example, at the Eastern Siberia, not at the results of the Moscow, but at the results in Eastern Siberia, there are some large cities where United Russia got as little as 22% of the votes. With the voters turnover at 50%, that's about 10% of the population. Are we really sure that somebody worked hard to falsify these kind of results? Well,
gotcha.
So that kind of leads me to say that the voices that are coming from pro-government blogosphere, the voices that are coming from the government, have some merit to it because the results are not as straightforward as they claim to be.
Well, I just want to get in here because, Jeffrey, you mentioned that there were some inconsistencies, south of Moscow, 440,000, or 440 miles rather. We have this photo, which is one of many that have been tweeted. You see it says, it's a protester there, I believe in Moscow, saying, "We are 146%. Now, the reason being, because as you can see in this graphic, you see the tally in this town. If you add up all of the tallies, it reaches 146%, which is, of course, impossible. But I'm also curious to ask you about Putin and the United Russia Party and their campaigning in general. I want to play this video, which is a campaign video from the United Russia Party. Let's take a look. Now I'm going to stop it right there because it says, "Let's do it together," which I think is a double entendre. But what do you make of this sexualization of, one's civic duties? A lot of people who support Putin might say it's confidence, but a lot of people seem to think that this is arrogance online.
Well, you could probably make a reasonable case that it was both. I mean, certainly political advertising in any country is not exactly known for the depth of its analytical substance. So, in a sense, it's not all that surprising. But I think what's interesting here is that, the United Russia Party really, it's never really put forth a consistent program. It doesn't have an ideology. It doesn't have a vision for where it wants to take the country. And so I think, in their attempts to get people to come out and vote to vote for it, they often have to fall back on tactics like this because they don't really have more of a programmatic vision for what they want to do in the Duma if they're returned to power.
Well, I want to stay on this topic of the potential for discrepancies or inconsistencies in the election. And this was a video that struck us because it's by someone who had been working as a voting observer. And let's look at what she has to say.
Скажите, пожалуйста, почему вы сегодня с белыми цветами?
Просто знак того, что это мирный митинг, что мы не хотим революции, не хотим крови, но все эти люди устали от того, что происходит, и мы хотим мирных, но изменений радикальных. Вот поэтому мы пришли просто, чтобы люди вспоминали нашу цель, не поддавались ни на какие провокации.
Now, Anastasia, I want to bring this to you. She's saying that they want to have these peaceful protests, but why now? I mean, we haven't seen protests of this magnitude, as you mentioned, since the fall of the Soviet Union. What do you think is motivating people?
I think that at this point there is a really strong middle urban class that has formed and has some understanding of what's going on in other countries in Europe, what's going on in other democracies. The economic situation, as you mentioned, for some residents of large urban cities due to Putin policies or due to the improvement in economics in Russia has changed, and people can afford to travel abroad and they see how it works in other countries. And I think that the tipping point for the people this winter or this fall specifically was that they saw the falsifications, they saw how the switch between Putin and Medvedev was done, and they felt that everything was decided for them instead of by them or with them, and that brought them to the streets. They're not bringing in any new ideas. They want the decisions to be made by them. They want to formulate where they want to go from this point. They want to formulate what their country will be. They want to do it themselves. And I think that the fact that first Putin and Medvedev made the decision that Putin will be running for the president, there was no genuine discussion. It was just the announcement, basically, well, here, take it. And then the elections where people saw that, in fact, there were some falsification.
Actually, I want to get in there because it's interesting, Derek, you showed that video and the lady was carrying white flowers. But we've also seen images like this and the term white ribbon being shared on Twitter and many other social media platforms. You see a young girl using white ribbon as kind of a symbol of, I guess, opposition. Now, we have a question about the white ribbons, and I'm going to put this one to you, Jeff. So let's take a listen. This is from Tall's Dog.
The symbol that some of the protesters use is the white ribbon. The website for the white ribbon, belayalenta.ru, it's listed as being created in October 2011. Do you think this means that the protest movement was pre-planned way in ahead of the actual elections? And what would have been their motivations in doing so?
Jeffrey?
Well, I mean, it depends what you really mean by the protest movement. I mean, I think, Anastasia is right that since the announcement that Putin would be returning to power, there's been a kind of swelling of discontent. And you've had people looking for, ways of expressing that discontent. Now, I don't think that means that necessarily there is practical coordination for, if the election goes like this, we're going to do this. But I think there has been this kind of cresting wave of discontent that's been building up over the last couple of months. And so certainly there's a prehistory here. It's not like, it was just this falsified election that actually set off the discontent. It was something that had been building up for a while.
So premeditated, and perhaps social media was used to mobilize some of the organization of the protests.
Yeah, I mean, the role of social media in the protests has been interesting. I mean, on the one hand, it's been used to document some of these abuses, which have then fed the protests, have fed on the discontent. But as we've seen in other parts of the world this year, especially in the Arab world, it's also used as a mobilization tool. It's a way for people to link up, to get the message out, and to coordinate things across, widely spaced parts of the country.
It's also being used by the authorities to get the message out. I mean, we see here, this is from a screenshot on Sunday of Medvedev's actual Facebook page, and you can see he posted this comment saying that he's been instructed to check all messages with polling stations regarding compliance with the legislation on elections. And you see that there are 9,000 plus comments on it. Well, we took a look at the page just today. This is right now, and you already have upwards of 15,000 comments there. So this is over the course of just a few days. And I'm curious, Anastasia, what does this really represent when you see this kind of back and forth between the authorities and the protesters playing out online? Is this potentially because there isn't as much space in the traditional areas of political discourse?
Well, President Medvedev is well known for his interest and his engagement in social media, and I think that's coming partially because of his program of engaging more young people, engaging more tech-savvy people who represent this upper middle class, who can who are working and acting on Facebook. So this is part of the program. This is part of the engagement of the part of the population who are politically active and who are becoming more politically important. And I think what is fascinating about this specific post, I checked it and I read, I wouldn't say I read all 15,000, but I read some of them. There is a genuine discussion going on between the people who are posting comments to this wall post of President Medvedev, and not all of them are negative. There is a genuine discussion on what can be done with the president after the new president is elected. What can just regular people who are on Facebook and who are interested in what's going to happen with Russia in the future, what can they do? And they're not necessarily pro-government or anti-government. These are the genuine discussions between people who are interested in the future of their country and want to do something for
Well,
it.
speaking of genuine discussions from people, actually, I want to get in another comment from our community. This is a video comment.
Yeah, this comes from Terrence, actually, in Ghana. So let's take a listen. He's talking about that point about what can be done.
I believe that since the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russian people have not yet fully made the choice to become a fully democratic nation. With these current crises, I believe that the Russian people now have to make the decision themselves. No one else can make it for them, to live fully in a democratic system or to be comfortable with a dictator who seems to be managing the country fairly well.
So Jeff, he says no one else can make the decision for them, but we've seen Putin and others criticize Hillary Clinton and others in the U.S. government for intervening, or as they see it, intervening. I mean, we have this tweet from Anwar al-Dushi who says Putin can't seriously put the ongoing protest on the U.S. The move is so Cold War. What do you think?
Well, there's really an established tradition in Russian politics of trying to blame the West and blame the United States, especially when things go wrong. Certainly it has its antecedents in the Cold War period, but we've seen it more recently as well. After some terrorist attacks in Russia in 2002, 2004, Putin in particular made some very strong accusations about the United States wanting to, his word was, rip a juicy chunk off of Russia. And so, I think once again, there's this kind of almost automatic reaction on the part of the authorities that, when things are going badly, you try and deflect attention away from people's discontent with the government by, blaming the United States, blaming the outside world.
Which we also saw throughout the Arab Spring.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a natural tendency is what you're saying.
Well, it's something that's well established inside Russia.
Well, then how about this? We have a tweet from Jonathan Tabb saying, and this is to your point earlier, Anastasia, Soviet leftover, united Russia does not need to rig to win. The opposition is made up of divided and unelectable parties. Do you think that's true?
That's actually part of the discourse of the pro-government blogosphere, and there is some reason to that. Basically, what the pro-Putin and pro-government discourse puts out is that there is no strong leader at this point who can reasonably be trusted to run the country, especially through the financial economic crisis that the global community is going through. And Putin is the main and the only leader who can lead the country to surviving through this. Maybe we can choose somebody else later on in the game, when the situation is more stable, when we know that we have bread and butter on our table later on. But at this point, we cannot, and there is a merit to that, and that's actually the fact that was highlighted by pro-opposition as well as pro-government. There is no leader who can run the country at this point, who can be real opposition to Putin, and who can be entrusted by people. And that's the major problem.
Let me push on that point, because isn't that always the response of any autocratic regime, and that basically we are the people who you can trust. We're the only people you can trust to really do things well. And frankly, it's not only autocratic regimes, but we even see it in, you know, countries that are purportedly democratic, where the argument will be made that you need to give us leadership because we're the only people. Do you think that there's credence to that? Is there an absolute lack of political diversity and option in Russia?
No, I wouldn't say that there is a lack of political diversity. There are actually new leaders that are just rising up recently in the last couple of years. Unfortunately, for example, the blogger Alexei Navalny, which is well known, who was arrested, given 15 days in prison. He is unfortunately better known in the West than he is known in his own country. And there is real potential to this person, and he might become a real leader and a real oppositional leader. However, at this point, if you ask people around Russia if they know about him, outside Moscow, outside St. Petersburg community, most don't. And that's a major problem for younger leaders, that they're here, they are uprising, but they are not yet in the position when they can lead this group of disgruntled urban elites.
Okay.
On that note, Jeffrey, maybe you can talk us through this image, because I think this is something that's been circulating online, and it really captures perhaps some of that cronyism that people say Putin's party is responsible for. This is Putin at the top, and all of these other people underneath him are people who he's either related to, I believe, or business leaders who in one way or another are affiliated with his program. What's the significance of this, just very briefly?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that really fuels the discontent that's been spreading across Russia over the last several years has been the sense that, you know, there's an us and a them, and that this is a government that's very much by and for the narrow elite that makes it up. And so, you know, you have examples of high-ranking officials whose children are being put in charge of major companies and becoming, you know, billionaires in their 20s. And there's a sense that, you know, if you don't have those kind of political connections, the game is rigged against you. You don't have the same opportunities. And, you know, I think the graphic you showed there is a very detailed example of precisely that phenomenon.
So I want to actually get deeper into that in the post-show, this question of the opportunities that are available to the current generation of Russians. And I want to thank both of you for the insights that you've offered thus far. We're going to continue the conversation, but before we do that, Ahmed, tell us a little bit about some of the other stories we're following.
Great. All right. Well, today we have 3 leads. Our first lead is from Ukraine, where the justice minister can be seen cruising around in a stolen Mercedes-Benz from Germany. Last year, Ukrainian authorities seized this stolen car at the border between the two countries. And under Ukrainian law, authorities are allowed to keep any property they confiscate. So after ignoring an Interpol alert about the car, a Ukrainian court ruled that the Mercedes could remain in the country, and it was eventually transferred to the justice minister. Now, our second lead is from China, where images of an uncompleted tourist park serve as a stark reminder of the economic and development problems still facing the country. The Wonderland Park, as it was to be called, is situated about 45 minutes from the center of Beijing. Developers once promoted it as the largest amusement park in Asia, but construction stopped more than a decade ago when funds were withdrawn due to disagreements over property prices with the local government and local farmers. Now, our last lead is from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston. They have created an ultra-fast imaging system that is able to capture light as it passes through objects. Now, this is a video using the new camera. Researchers have created slow-motion movies showing light from a laser moving through a bottle. In this video, you can see the light enter through the bottom of the bottle and travel to the cap, in effect snapping a picture in less than 2 trillionths of a second, allowing us to capture video at the speed of light. Now, those are our stream leads. To find out more about these stories, you could visit stream.aljazeera.com/leads, where you can cast your votes for the stories that you think we should take a closer look at. And we'll do just that in an upcoming show. Back to you, Derek.
That video of the light is the
Right.
coolest thing I've ever seen. Stay with us. We're going to talk about other cool and interesting things. We're going to get deeper into what is facing people on the ground in Russia. You're not going to want to miss this. Join us at stream.aljazeera.com, and you can be a part of the conversation using our hashtag AJStream. You're not going to want to miss the rest of this conversation. We'll see you online. Hi, welcome back to the Post Show. We're going to continue our conversation about the ongoing protest amid the parliamentary elections in Russia and the upcoming presidential elections. I want to come back to a point that you had made moments ago, Jeffrey, about the kind of status of Russia and the next generation and what opportunities people have. What is happening here? Because we've talked about a situation where Putin has helped to usher in a degree of political stability and prosperity for the country. Medvedev has continued along with Putin's policies. And yet it seems that people, though they've had certain benefits, are now seeing some measure of discontent. What is at the root of this?
Well, I think it's kind of a sense, in the broadest sense, I think there's a growing belief that the current model has run its course. That, you know, Putin had a task to accomplish when he came to power in 1999-2000, and that was to stabilize the country, to knit it back together after the chaos of the 1990s, and to lay the foundation for economic growth. And he's largely done that. But the question is, where do you go from here? And I think there's a growing sense that, you know, the economy is stuck. It's still overly dependent on hydrocarbons because of the reasons of the corruption that we talked about before. There aren't really as many opportunities for bright, talented young people as there are in other countries. And, you know, there's still uncertainty about the political system. And so what you're seeing is, first of all, the rise of discontent within Russia, expressed in the protests that we've seen over the last few days, but also by a growing wave of emigration. The number of well-educated, talented young Russians who've moved abroad has been increasing over the last several years and doesn't show any sign of going back.
Okay, speaking of talented, well-educated Russians, Anastasia, back to you. What do you think the impact of these protests is going to have on Putin's re-election?
I think the part of the impact is already showing online and specifically on social media. Basically, Putin will have to make a decision how and when and in which direction the political system and he personally and his role in this political system is going to change to address some of the frustration of this growing middle class that is looking for new ideas, that is looking for a movement forward. We've seen a lot of references made to Brezhnev period, and that's how people are looking at the new time for Putin in the office to come, that there will be a certain stagnation, and they think that nobody wants to happen. These young people, they want to move forward, they want to have more opportunities to be freer. The stagnation is not something they need at this point in their life.
You know, we had mentioned some of the opposition figures, and you brought up the issue of Alexei Navalny, who has been in prison, as we mentioned. And it seems that there have been these prominent voices against the current regime or administration happening online. Can you talk to us a little bit? I mean, we know that Russia has got a massive number of people online, arguably the most people of any country in the world. What is it about the online community or social media in the Russian context that is making it this area of ferment?
Well, basically at this point there is no other outlet where people can voice their true and honest opinion. The TV, the radio, the newspapers, almost everything speaks largely to the discourse that is said by the government, by the president. So the internet has been the outlet for people to start voicing their opinion and to see if there is any support to their opinion. And don't forget that official media always carry some some sort of intimidation. So before you go on TV, you have to be sure that what you're saying makes sense, is reasonable, is interesting to anybody else. Whereas internet is a more relaxed atmosphere where you can just throw your ideas and see if somebody gets interested. And I think that's partially how the discussion started. And then as the group of people who were discontent with what's happening in the country grew larger, they found each other, they connected, they started a true and substantial dialogue. That's basically what we see.
Well, on the dialogue too, we definitely want to get some of our folks in, and I should make a note that actually Russia has the largest number of internet users in Europe, not in the world.
Right. Well, it's funny, we're talking about, Russians being tech savvy and the opportunities that arise, on the internet and how it's different than TV. But earlier we said that Medvedev is known to be tech savvy, and someone tweeted in, Kevin Rothrock, disagreeing, saying, if Medvedev is so tech savvy and digitally engaged, how does one explain his idiotic Facebook status update, which Derek mentioned, and his Rykov retweet? Now, we mentioned this earlier this week. This is the retweet translated in English. This came from the official account, Medvedev Russia. It says, I'll translate it for you, it has become clear that if a person writes the expression, quote, party of swindlers and thieves in their blog, then they are a stupid sheep getting blank in the mouth. And he used a vulgar term. What do you make of this? I mean, is this just carelessness, Jeffrey, or is it intentional? Is he trying to send a message to the opposition?
Well, it's probably more the former than the latter. I mean, I have a hard time imagining Dmitry Medvedev sitting there in his office in the Kremlin, retweeting this. It's, there's a staff that does this.
Right. But still, does it hurt his credibility, considering the fact that people champion him as tech savvy?
Yeah, it does, right? I mean, the impression that he's always tried to give is of, the kind of hipper, younger, more in tune figure in this political tandem. And, to some degree, I think that is reflective of the fact that he's of a younger generation and has different experiences than Putin. But to some extent, it's also an image. It's branding and marketing. And, examples like this, I think, make it clear that, to a great extent, this is it's a campaign that's being put on by the people who are trying to promote Medvedev as much as it is really reflective of who Medvedev is personally.
If I might, I would actually disagree. I don't think that would really hurt his image, because if you look at some of the tweets and retweets put out there by the opposition,
right. It's just
I mean,
bad.
the curse words are just flowing there back and forth. So it's not about specifically that. It's about the ideas that people put forward, and there is no reason for this just one specific retweet to really damage his image that badly. However, there was another thing that I was going to say. For some reasons, we're looking only at the discourse of the opposition on the internet, whereas there is the pro-government blogosphere that is really savvy, that is really reasonable, very well versed, that's putting out a lot of blogs that make sense, that appeal to people, and that address some of the really strong values that even the upper middle class that is uprising at this point can relate to.
Interesting. It's funny because we saw, there was even a protest, and I don't have it right here, but there was a couple of images of protests that were pro-Putin. But there was one tweet that had mentioned that the pro-Putin rallies had started at 4 p.m. and ended at 5:15 p.m. I wish I had the image, and arguing that they were smaller and perhaps less spontaneous and more planned by the parties. But
that's, I think, part of what seems to be interesting about what's happening, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that the protests, from what we've been hearing, that are happening, the large ones, are so much anti-Putin as in they're anti the loss of agency of the people. It seems that people want to have a choice. Now, what that choice may be is an open question.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Anastasia made a good point before that, Putin is still quite popular, and United Russia, for all of the falsification that we've seen in the campaign, still did better than any of the other opposition parties. It does have a certain reservoir of support in the country. Now, that said, I mean, I think the opposition is real and it's getting stronger, and to the extent that the authorities continue to try and hide behind their past accomplishments without really putting forward a program for the future or addressing the sources of some of these complaints, I think the more that they're going to lose their legitimacy. And what has been interesting about these protests, you're right, they're not specifically anti-Putin, but the amount of anti-Putin rhetoric that we've seen in these protests and online is much higher than I think any of us would have expected to see even a year ago.
Well, I was talking to a Russia analyst about maybe a month ago, and I was asking, hey, so what do you think is going to happen? And they're like, oh yeah, Putin is going to come back into power. It's going to be no big deal, business as usual. And we're seeing it's clearly not business as usual. Final question to both of you. What ultimately do you think is going to happen? Do you believe that these protests are going to potentially shift the way in which the United Russia Party deals with the populace, or do you think this will be a blip on the radar and it will be business as usual? You first, Anastasia.
No, I do not think that it's possible to go to business as usual. And just the recent responses from the government shows that they are not going to do business as usual, because many oppositional leaders were actually on the state TV. They were given a chance to project what they are standing for, what are their ideas, and talk to people from the TV. So that clearly shows that the government is listening, and there is a strong possibility that the government is going to change, including Putin. And although Putin has been kind of behind the scenes during the presidency of Medvedev, I do believe that some of the reforms, some of the innovations, including the Silicon Valley, next to more so-called Silicon Valley, the Skolkovo, is part supported by Putin, and that's a big step forward. So there will be changes. There will be good changes.
Okay, and your take, Jeff?
I think it is going to be difficult to simply go back to the status quo. I think the size of these protests really caught the government off guard, and I think they're still kind of figuring out how exactly to respond. In the optimistic scenario, I think they do open up a little bit more space for debate. They do open up the political system a little bit, give some more voices a chance to influence politics in the country. I think in the negative scenario, they look to really put the lid back on and sort of regain control in a kind of authoritarian way. And I think if you do that, you can have some really negative consequences.
Okay, well, thank you on that point. Appreciate both of you being here with us. Ahmed, thank you for getting our audience involved. Anastasia, Jeffrey, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you, our audience, for being with us. On Wednesday, we examine how the U.S. government is reacting to illegal immigration. Stay with us. We're now going to continue, actually, the conversation online using the hashtag AJStream. As always, we'll see you online.